Hey, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Come on in, come on in. Good to see you. In the 1940s, two songs were recorded very close together. They have forever deepened Americans' understanding of their country. The first one was written by this fellow, Israel Balin. He was a very talented songwriter. Anybody by chance know what his stage name was? He didn't call himself that on stage. He called himself something different, Irving Berlin. You may have heard of him. This is the prelude, probably the best part of his song, God Bless America. The chorus is much more familiar. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. How many of you know that song? Okay, it's deeply shaping American thought. Now, I said in the 40s there were two songs that forever shaped Americans' understanding of their nation. The second one was written by this guy, Woody Guthrie. Now, Guthrie was a communist who absolutely abhorred the values of the song God Bless America. So in protest, he wrote a totally different song, and he called it, this was his title for it, God Blessed America for Me. That was the title of his song. Anybody by any chance know what the actual name was when it was recorded? It wasn't called God Bless America for Me. Anybody know? It was called This Land Is Your Land. And it also became a massive hit. When they recorded it, the two communist verses were dropped. And in a great ironic twist, this song that was so anti-American became a massive celebrated song. School children for generations learned it in America. It was even sung in churches. In fact, I imagine you know it so well, you could sing it and fill in the blanks. Here we go. Let's try this. This land is? See that? This land is? From where everybody moves. That's right. Islands from the redwood to the Gulf Stream. Otters. Everybody, this land was made for you and me. Very good. All right. You'll be singing that all day now. Now, do you see what I mean when I say these two songs forever influenced Americans' understanding of their land? Those of you that are joining us from other places, you may even know those songs as well. I think you should know to understand that those songs were written over 80 years ago, but they still deeply influence how Americans today think of their country. Well, I bring that up because that is exactly the way that Hebrew parents and later temple and synagogue teachers made sure that Hebrew children knew the two songs that are contained in Joshua 13 through 19. Joshua 13 through 19 did for Israel what those two songs do for America. Joshua 13 through 19 basically are two land songs that were penned just a few years apart. One was at Gilgal. That was their God Bless Israel song, all right? The other one was written at Shiloh, and that was their This Land Is Your Land. They were recorded in one recording here in Joshua 13 through 19, and these two songs forever change how Hebrew people think about their land. Open your Bible to Joshua 14. Let's learn from these two great songs. We begin with the divisions made at Gilgal. By the way, that's the title in your notes. If you're online, you should have a link from your host. If you're in the auditorium, open up your bulletin. You'll see the notes there. The divisions made at Gilgal are the big issue beginning in Joshua 14. So we'll start reading there. Joshua 14, verse 1. The Israelites received these portions that the priest Eleazar, Joshua the son of Nun, and the family heads of the Israelite tribes gave them in the land of Canaan. Their inheritance was by lot, as the Lord had commanded through Moses, for the 9.5 tribes, because Moses had given the inheritance to the 2.5 tribes beyond the Jordan. But he gave no inheritance among them to the Levites. The Levites had the priesthood. That was their inheritance. The descendants of Joseph became 2 tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim. No portions of the land was given to the Levites except cities to live in, along with pasture lands for their cattle and livestock. So the Israelites did as the Lord commanded Moses, and they divided the land. The descendants of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal. Now we're going to stop there, and let me explain what's happening. At Gilgal, Joshua asked the southern tribe of Judah and the 2 tribes that are descended from Joseph, Manasseh and Ephraim, to come to Gilgal. Gilgal is this place just north of Jericho. And what you're going to see over the next few chapters is in chapter 15, Judah gets their inheritance. That's this area right here. And then in chapter 16, Ephraim gets their inheritance. That's this part right here. And then the western half of Manasseh, Moses already gave the eastern half their land over here. They're going to get their inheritance. This is the song about Gilgal. But before we look at what God grants them, there's a fundamental question, and I know you're probably asking it in your Irving Berlin voice. Irving Berlin from Brooklyn. Why do this at Gilgal? Huh? Why make everyone come to this place for distribution? Great question, Irving. Thank you, because Gilgal is where God blessed Israel. This is the place where their land really became their own for the first time. This Gilgal was where Joshua, that was his main camp for the entire conquest of the land. It was at Gilgal that the people renewed their covenant with God. The new generation, they trusted the Lord. They were circumcised at Gilgal, which is what led to the name of the place. The manna from heaven stopped when they were at Gilgal. They ate from the produce of their land for the very first time there. Speaking of first, the very first Passover ever celebrated on the west side of the Jordan River happened at Gilgal. Gilgal is where God blessed Israel. All right, think of it like this. Anybody know what this place is? Anybody know that building? Say it if you know it. Independence Hall, very good. That place holds heavy significance in American history. Independence Hall is where in 1776 our forefathers signed the Declaration of Independence. This is where they ratified the Articles of the Confederation. This is where they spent a lot of time creating the United States Constitution. You see the parallel? No, by the way, I am not suggesting some godly biblical parallel between Israel and the USA. Listen very carefully. Replacement theology and Christian nationalism are biblically sloppy and terribly dangerous. I'm merely tying into your shared national experience as a way to better understand the Bible and Gilgal. Why does Joshua gather these tribes at Gilgal? Because this place has been incredibly important in the young nation's history. This is where they first sang, God bless Israel. Okay, set it all in context. Look at the map in your notes. Actually, it's more clear up here. You may want to look up here. Moses earlier made the disbursements, as the text said, on the east side of the Jordan River. Here's the Jordan. So the eastern half of Manasseh, Gad, Reuben, they got their land from Moses before the book of Joshua begins, before Moses passed away. Now at Gilgal, he's going to give Judah their land, Ephraim their land, Manasseh, West Manasseh their land. The other tribes, that's going to happen in a little bit at Shiloh. It's all part of this big thought section. Now, when I say he gave them their land at Gilgal, I don't want you to misunderstand. Not everything was perfect and peaceful at this conference they had at Gilgal. There was actually complaining. I know, this may come as a big shock to you, but human beings actually have a tendency toward complaining. Humans can even complain when they're being given an amazing gift. I know, isn't that shocking? Let me give an example from my own life. 3 friends of mine, a few years ago, they took it upon themselves to help this homeless fellow that they had gotten to know. And they did a lot of work with him, and then they went out and they, from their own pockets, these guys pooled their money and they bought him a brand new Chevy truck. Isn't that amazing? And they couldn't wait to give it to him, and they brought him out and he saw the truck for the first time and he said, I wouldn't be caught dead in a Chevy. He was almost caught dead. Helping people is good, even if they're ungrateful. Chevy vehicles are great. The point is, human beings grumble even when they're given great gifts. And because of that, God knows that we whiners need the lesson of hard work. Prime example, flip over to Joshua 17. Another part of this song at Gilgal. Go to verse 14. Joshua 17, verse 14. Joseph's descendants, that's Manasseh and Ephraim, said to Joshua, why did you give us only one tribal allotment as an inheritance? I mean, we have many people because the Lord's been blessing us greatly. I don't know if you know, that's how they spoke. It's a little known fact. If you have so many people, Joshua replied to them, go to the forest and clear an area for yourselves there in the land of the Perizzites and Rephaim, because Ephraim's hill country is too small for you. But the sons of Joseph said, the hill country is not enough for us, and all the Canaanites who inhabit the valley area, they have iron chariots, both at Beit Shan with its surrounding villages and in the Jezreel Valley. So Joshua replied to Joseph's family, that is Manasseh, Ephraim and Manasseh, you have many people and great strength. You will not have just one allotment because the hill country will be yours also. It is a forest, clear it, and its outlying areas will be yours. You can also drive out the Canaanites. You can, even though they have iron chariots and are strong. On the right side of our notes, we title this, The Lesson of Hard Tasks, The Lessons of Hard Tasks. There are 3 parts to what Joshua's teaching here, and they're very important. First, don't freeze in fear. Secondly, complain less. And third, work boldly. Look, let me show you what Joseph's clans, Ephraim and Manasseh, are dealing with. This is this is roughly the area that they were allotted right here. And I used a topo map so you could see some of what they're unhappy about. Ignore the coloration because this looks unforested, and it actually was very forested then. But the woodedness, this was really covered in trees, and the highness of the hills made this difficult for growing crops. And then the lower part they were given, down here, well, that's where the Canaanites have chariots, which were the super tool of the time. If you didn't have chariots, you could never drive out supposedly people who did have them. They say, hey, we don't like our portion. We can't take possession. This is just too hard, right? And Joshua says, don't freeze in fear. Look at verse 17. This is an attempt to remind them that this is their land. And they need to fight hard and fast to overcome their paralyzing fear. Don't pause. Get after it. My friend Kevin Hobson sent me a tragic parallel to this from World War II. Kevin wrote, and he said, Lieutenant Norman Dyke, Jr. of 506 Easy Company in the 101st Airborne Division. By the way, that's the group that was made famous in the book and the movie Band of Brothers, if you saw those. Lieutenant Dyke won multiple Bronze Stars for his heroics in World War II. But sadly, he is perhaps more remembered for the time he froze in fear. He was instructed by Major Winters to take his platoon across an open field with little to no cover and into a town where the Germans were waiting for them. Dyke was to move with alacrity and commitment to keep casualties at a minimum. Instead, he hesitated. He lost track of one of his squads, blaming them for going too fast, and paused the assault in the middle of the field. According to the Army record, he then, quote, fell apart and instructed the recovered squad to attack the town from the rear while he and his squad took a beating in the field. Major Winters redirected, implored, scolded Dyke to move on, but Dyke did not. Captain Ronald Spears finally intervened, taking over the assault, making the operation successful. Lieutenant Dyke was a highly decorated veteran who had many successful missions before and, thank God, after this moment. However, this one freeze where he refused to follow orders stained his legacy and cost lives. Close quote. Joseph's tribes are going to face that exact same problem if they remain full of fear. Joseph wants them undaunted for their own sakes and for the good of their country. Joshua also sees right through their entitled attitude that's behind their complaining. Verse 15, look at that very sarcastic way to say they need to complain less. Joshua says, okay, you're such a big people, you need so much room, then you better get to work, cutting down trees, preparing land, all right? You parents, I know you parents and teachers especially have spoken just like this. The student says to you, I've got too much homework. You say, well, then you better get on it and quit whining. You better get to work, hadn't you? Right? That legitimate communication about problems is great. Whining in order to avoid hard work, that's not. And that's part of the lesson of Gilgal. Complain less. By the way, have you ever noticed this? Whining to avoid hard work is usually a character trait that gets passed on through generations. You ever notice that? Okay, so take these two tribes, West Manasseh and Ephraim. These are the exact same people that are going to complain, I mean really complain about Gideon in Judges chapter 8. Their children and grandchildren are going to whine about Jephthah in Judges chapter 12, and their great-great-greats are going to, you can look it up, 2 Samuel 20, they are going to complain about David. They're just whiners. Why do certain families and clans seem to just perpetuate complaining? You know why? Here's why. The same reason that our children are stinkers in so many ways. They live with us. That's why. Where do you think they get it? From you and me. I had a phone call from a friend of mine one day. Never forget this. Lady called me very upset. And she said, Pastor Wayne, and when she finally calmed down, I mean, she was really upset. I said, Mary Gail, what is wrong? And she said, Pastor Wayne, this is what I heard myself say. I finally know why my child is such a pansy. And I said, what? She said, out of my mouth, I just heard this. And she got a really whiny voice. Aaron, stop whining. Oh, what a marvelous moment of learning. Philippians chapter 2, verse 14, really tidy summary of this part of the lesson of Gilgal. Read it with me. Everybody together. Philippians 2:14. Do everything without grumbling and arguing. Do some things. Do the things you feel like doing. Is that what it said? What's that word right there, boys and girls? Let's say it again. Do everything without grumbling and arguing. The victim mentality was alive and well in Joshua's 14th century BC. It was part of Paul's first century world, and whining is still with us today. Therefore, this lesson isn't merely for Israel, is it? It's for us. Don't freeze, complain less, and thirdly, work boldly. Look at 15 and verse 18. These are really powerful statements that these people need to get to work. They can grow crops up in the hills. They just need to stop talking about it and start doing it. Like Tony Madone. Let me introduce you to Tony Madone. Tony was a lifetime farmer, a family of farmers, lived in the flatlands down in the Arkansas River Valley, was very gifted at growing produce. That was what he did. And in 1995, long story, but 1995, his family moved up here into the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, west of Walsenburg, between West Cliff and Salida. Now, Tony is somebody who believes very strongly, as a believer in Jesus. He thinks that it is his job to produce for others, that God has blessed him to be a blessing. So when he got to that area, he started volunteering in this food pantry in Salida, and he found out something very, very sad. There was no fresh produce. The families that were in need could not get fresh produce because it was too expensive. The food pantry couldn't afford to ship produce from down here in the flatlands all the way up into the mountains. So Tony began to work on this problem. And what he did was he went to his church. They had found a church home, and he began to wrangle with some people there who owned property, and he managed to convince them to give him 9 acres of land. 9 acres of land way up in the hills, and he said, I'm going to grow produce there. And all the old guys, experienced people there, just laughed. They were like, son, you cannot grow produce at 7,000 feet. And he said, you're probably right, but I'm going to try. And we're going to work this problem. So I want to show you what they did. When I met Tony, he very kindly shared pictures with me. So this is the farm, 1996. March 1st is when they started. Weeds 3 to 4 feet deep all over the 9 acres. He had to level, this may have been the hardest part of the job, he had to level a whole bunch of old cross ditches that had been used for flood retention and development. The ground was, this was amazing to me, the ground was so dry and hard it could not be plowed. The discs would not go into the ground. He had to water it for an entire week. And then after a week, this is what it looked like. You can see, isn't that pretty? He's getting deep tillage. And when I say tillage, folks, this ground, it turned out, had not been plowed in 45 years. Okay, you city people, that means nothing to you. But a few of you understand. That's a really big deal. Here they are roller harrowing. You can see how smooth and pretty it's looking, getting ready for a finished seed bed. And they got a few volunteers from church, and here they are planting a field in squash. Anyway, great. It's wonderful. It's very good for you. Anyway, they also transplanted 4,000 cabbage and broccoli plants. You can see them there. And here's their volunteers out hoeing. Look, can you see? Look at you see the little plants? They're coming up. That's the field of squash. And then Tony put in another field of sweet corn, not feed corn like we grow around here. And I know this is very late in the year. This is June. Here, our corn's already harvested by then, much higher up later. And here was their production that very first year, 1996, 1,982 heads of cabbage. 1,718 heads of broccoli. That squash field that you saw being put in, 7,220 zucchini, 8,711 yellow, 4,751 acorn. And then the corn, here's the corn being boxed up, 22,944 ears produced. And every single year after that start way back in 96, they have increased their production. This is Tony. Here he is still working the tractor in 2020. All that came from 9 little acres of land. And their hard work was so blessed, it was so productive, that Tony started a nonprofit that he called Colorado Farm to Table. I called up and asked about their numbers for this last year, and here's what he told me. Last year, we had 86 volunteers, and we provided, get this, we provided 106,693 Coloradans with fresh veggies. Isn't that amazing? He does watch our show. Sometimes he studies the Bible with us. Would you give him a hand? Let Tony know. Well done. That, my friends, that is what Joshua had in mind. That's the lesson of Gilgal. Don't freeze, complain less, work boldly, and watch God bless. What would happen in your life if you did that? You've got things, you believers in Jesus, you have things God has put in front of you to do. What would happen if you quit freezing and with alacrity you attacked the problem and you complained less and you worked boldly and you watched God bless? Think about that. That idea runs all the way up to chapter 18. And in chapter 18, it shifts, and in chapter 19, we start the apportionment of the land at Shiloh. This is the second song. So let's look at the second song, the divisions made at Shiloh. Turn over to chapter 18. You should be in 17 on my Bible. It's the next page over. Let's read verses 1 through 6. The entire Israelite community assembled at Shiloh and set up the tent of meeting there. That's the tabernacle. The land had been subdued before them, but 7 tribes among the Israelites were left who had not divided up their inheritance. So Joshua asked the Israelites, how long will you delay going out to take possession of the land that the Lord, the God of your fathers, gave you? Appoint for yourselves 3 men from each tribe, and I will send them out. They're to go and survey the land, write a description of it for the purpose of inheritance, and return to me. Then they're divided into 7 portions. Judah's to remain in his territory in the south, Joseph's family and territory in the north. So what he's saying is this doesn't change anything about the Gilgal song. This is a new song, all right, new story. When you have written a description of the 7 portions of land and brought it to me, I will cast lots for you here in the presence of the Lord our God. Now, again, before we start, it's very important to ask the question that you're posing in your Woody Guthrie imitation, why that place? Great question, Woody, thank you. To answer why Shiloh, we have to go all the way back to Jacob. Jacob is the original grandfather of all these tribes. At the end of his life, Jacob's very old. He's living in Egypt with his son Joseph and his brothers and all their offspring who moved there. Before he departs this earth, Jacob gives out a prophetic blessing. Genesis 49:10 has a direct impact on what we're reading right here in Joshua because of this statement about Jacob's son Judah. Look at Genesis 49:10. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. Now, the Hebrew in this text uses a number of euphemisms that are kind of hard to render in our language. The first is the scepter, the first main word, that's easy. We know that word. It means kingdom authority, a symbol of authority in the kingdom. The ruler of Israel, the king, is going to come from the line of Judah. And the line of Judah is the point of this between his feet. That's a euphemism. You know how we describe little kids as always being under your feet, right? We didn't make that up. The Hebrews used the same phrase. So much so that they adopted a euphemism where your offspring, especially your grandchildren and further on down, are called your between your feet. Those are your between your feet. So the ruler's going to come from Judah through his line from between your feet. Now, the next key word is staff. Staff there is not the same as scepter. It's a totally different word. Mehokak is a word that actually, it's a stylus. This is something that was used for inscribing cuneiform words into wet clay tablets. Clay tablets were the major media of the day, right? So you would inscribe in them. But if it was a decree, if it was a law, only the king could do that. Only the king had the authority to make laws, to give decrees, all right? Next key word, just one more, is Shiloh. Now, Shiloh is actually not a place. Shiloh's a person. Shiloh it means one, talking about a person, one who has the right to make peace. Okay, put it all together. Jacob prophesies that Judah's offspring are going to keep alive the idea of Hebrew rule until this Prince of Peace comes to take his scepter. And this coming one, this Shiloh, this Prince of Peace, is going to be raised as a member of the tribe of Judah. Wow, that proved true, didn't it? Think about Jesus, the adopted son of Joseph, the child of Mary. He is the Lion of what tribe? What tribe is Jesus from, everybody? He is the Prince of Peace. He is the Lord. Remember how Hebrews calls him the author and perfecter of our faith? He's got the stylus. That's him. Jesus is Shiloh. That's who he is. Isn't that stunning? So knowing that this Shiloh is coming and wanting the Hebrews to remember this promise, Joshua names this place Shiloh, and he makes all the tribal leaders gather right there. Shiloh to come is really the issue. So much so that Joshua sets up the tabernacle here at Shiloh, and this becomes the center of Israeli worship for 300 plus years. Joshua's making a point. Hebrew worship should always remember this Messiah prince who is going to come from the line of Judah. Worship has always been, is now, and ever will be focused on Messiah Jesus. All God's people said? As special as Gilgal was, Shiloh is just as important. Gilgal memorialized the past blessings of Yahweh to Israel. Shiloh highlights the blessings that are to come through Messiah. And by the way, there's another difference. Joshua's style is different at Shiloh. Did you notice the different tone in the text? His method here for these remaining tribes is much more hands-on. Look, he has them report directly back to him. That's a very different approach. It shows how flexible Joshua is. The mission is the same at Gilgal and Shiloh, but he employs different tactics for each situation. Will Frazier is that kind of leader. Mr. Frazier teaches and coaches the most dominant math team in American history, and I mean every bit of that. Buckholz High School in Gainesville, Florida, has won 13 of the last 14 national math competitions. Interesting factoid. I once competed in the Mu Alpha Theta State math competition. I competed in differential equations, and I got destroyed. Seriously, I think I finished dead last. And I went to a fairly prestigious high school. Not like Buckholz is not even in the top 1,000 high school registry on any list in America, but they absolutely rock at math, and it's because of Will Frazier. Will Frazier, by the way, made a fortune on Wall Street, retired very young, moved to Florida, became a scratch golfer, got bored, and said, I want to be a teacher. And he went in and absolutely revamped the entire math department at Buckholz. They started winning, and then they built a dynasty. Their graduates regularly go to MIT. There are families that move to Gainesville into their district so their elementary children can get into this math pipeline. It's amazing. But after their 8th national championship in a row, the pandemic hit, and it put everything on hold educationally. The strategies that had helped kids grow before couldn't be effectively accessed anymore. So Coach Frazier shifted his strategy. I'm going to let a journalist, Ben Cohen, tell you the rest of the story. He writes much better than I. Cohen says this: Frazier made a curious decision. He resigned from Buckholz High School, and he kept teaching. He rented an empty wing of his church and told parents he would be teaching his usual curriculum in person as if it were a normal school year. Their kids could learn from him and take the rest of their classes remotely or carpool back and forth to Buckholz. Mr. Frazier says he invited 145 students. His friends thought 20 or 30 would come. His pastor was optimistic. He predicted 80. He got 140. The math team proceeded to win last year's state and national titles by the widest gaps in the history of the program. The average margin of victory in Buckholz's previous national titles was 315 points. Last year, it won by 920. Just like Joshua at Shiloh, Coach Frazier shifted his operation location. He shifted his style. And doing so, he taught the same lesson Joshua teaches, the lesson of initiative. As Israel learned from the lessons of hard tasks at Gilgal, so they're going to grow from the lessons of initiative at Shiloh. Here's the situation. Joshua is really upset because these lazy tribes have not taken possession of their inheritance. In fact, they're not really even showing much interest in doing so. Look, the tribes east of the Jordan, they've set their boundaries. From Gilgal, Judah and the sons of Joseph, they've set their boundaries. Now, they're not done. They've connected the dots of the inheritance that they've got. They haven't colored in the picture. They've got to do that. But these folks haven't even connected. They barely even got started. They haven't done anything. Why not? Clue in verse 1. Take a look. The land had been subdued before them. The land was subdued. It was quiet at the moment. Terrorist attacks were down. Wealth was up. There was very little motivation to do extra hard work. Content in their relatively peaceful moment, it seems silly, all that walking and setting boundaries and fighting wars to complete God's plan. So they did nothing to advance. They showed no initiative at all. Aren't you glad that when life is good, we're never like that? I know, you're right. I asked 3 friends of mine to tell me, I thought this was very telling. I chose 3 friends. I said, tell me about a time when you showed enterprise in advancing God's kingdom work. And these were the answers I got. First friend said, when society became overt in its dedication to evil, I finally started speaking out. Another one said, when times were dark in my life, I reached out to the Lord, and that's when I really began to grow in him. And a third one said, I watched someone that I love die without Christ, And that's when I finally started sharing the gospel. Do you see the common theme? It's when things are rough that we begin to show initiative. I think those are the answers that most of us would likely give. I hate to say it, friends, but I think our default setting is very much like these 7 lazy tribes. Because things are subdued ahead of them, they show no initiative in advancing God's kingdom. By contrast, these chapters right here, they display some other people who are very bold. They are very bold in asking for chances to display God's work. For example, go back to chapter 15. Back at Gilgal, Joshua witnessed a really incredible scene. This is with Caleb and his daughter. Chapter 15, verse 16. Caleb said, "Whoever attacks and captures Kiriath-Sepher, I'll give my daughter Achsah to him as a wife." So Othniel, son of Caleb's brother Kenaz, captured it, and Caleb gave his daughter Achsah to him as a wife. When she arrived, she persuaded Othniel to ask her father for a field. Now, the text implies that he did, and Daddy said, "Sure, here, have the field." As she got off her donkey, Caleb asked her, "What can I do for you?" She replied, "Give me a blessing. Since you've given me land in the Negev," that's the southern wilderness, "give me the springs also." So he gave her the upper and lower springs. Now, we're going to learn more about Caleb later in our series. For now, please just note this. Caleb's daughter and her husband teach the lesson of initiative. This is Kiriath-Sepher, also known as Debir. Joshua and Israel had defeated Debir, but in the 12 or so years while they were fighting elsewhere, the rebels moved back in behind Debir's walls. Caleb wants people to get about God's work, to show some spunk. So he sets up a contest to get this city retaken, and it works. A very enterprising young man named Othniel takes the challenge, and he advances God's kingdom. And the initiative doesn't end there. Caleb's daughter Achsah, she knows you can't just live in a rock city, right? So she gets her husband to ask for a field outside of town. And then she goes to Daddy and she says, "Hey, those 2 springs," by the way, when you go to Israel, you'll see them. There's 2 springs there, one just north of Debir, one right on the side of the city. She said, "I need those diverted into the cisterns in the city because we can't make a go of this without irrigation." I look at Othniel and Achsah, and they remind me very much of Tony Badone. Each of these people is working hard to take possession of what God has gifted to them, laboring to make whatever they have productive for the Lord. Tony is a visionary in blue jeans, folks. Achsah is a visionary on a donkey. It's not, by the way, she is not pushy here. She's just being wise and enterprising. This lady is showing the spirit of conquest, of making an idea work. And all the men folk in her life, look at them. They're standing up and saying, "You go, girl. You go." That is awesome. And there were other examples. Look here. Up north in Manasseh's territory, there was a man named Zelophehad. He had only daughters. And they showed the same kind of spunk. Look at this, Joshua 17. They, the 5 daughters of Zelophehad, came before the priest Eleazar, Joshua son of Nun, and the leaders, saying, "The Lord commanded Moses to give us an inheritance among our male relatives." That's in Numbers 27. So they gave them an inheritance among their father's brothers in keeping with the Lord's instruction. I picture Joshua getting all these tribal leaders that have done nothing sitting around here at Shiloh and saying, "Have you watched what happened up in Manasseh with Zelophehad's daughters? Have you seen what Achsah did? I need you guys to get off your fannies and fight like girls," right? That's what he says to them here. In the New Testament, James does the same thing for us. He's a kind of Joshua as we are gathered in our own place of Shiloh today. Verse 17 of chapter 4, James summarized. Read it with me. James 4:17, everyone. "It is sin to know the good and yet not do it." You realize that? With all that God has put in front of you? Read it again. James 4:17. "It is sin to know the good and yet not do it." It's sin. God has said so many things that you and I know. We know these things. God says, if you're a believer in Jesus, you know He has said, "Give to my work," right? He has said, "Send missionaries to the world." He has told us to love one another, to pray for our enemies, to share the good news of Jesus, the Shiloh who has come and is returning. We know these things, don't we? And yet we often don't act. We lose the lesson of initiative and we don't do them. Oh, we got many rationalizations. "Oh, the political stakes are just too high right now. I haven't been to seminary. People will laugh at me. I don't have enough money. I'm taking care of my own household. I'm on medication. I'm old. I'm young." Those are excuses, and we all know it. Please, let the word of God at Shiloh penetrate your heart. Learn the lesson of trusting God enough to be bold. All God's people said? Ultimately, that's why Israel needs to learn these two land songs. Joshua 13 through 19 teaches them to trust God enough to be bold in all of life, and the same is true for us. In my experience, I have seen two things that change in people who absorb these two big ideas in this thought section of Joshua 13 through 19. Two things change. First, people who really learn these lessons absorb biblical values, and they start showing them. I was discussing this with our elders, and Thomas Campbell, one of our elders, reminded me of a piercing analysis that he and I had read years ago by Kay Himnowitz. She wrote an article called "What's Wrong with the Kids?" and it painfully details a generation that doesn't learn biblical values. Listen, this is her depiction of 21st century America. There is a sickness at the heart of the middle-class culture that most American kids know as reality. The mothers and fathers who inhabit these houses do a good deal of what we hear good parents today ought to do. They coach Little League teams, they go on family vacations, they fix dinner for the kids. In the end, though, they remain utterly clueless when it comes to turning their mansions into homes where children can learn how to lead meaningful lives. Devoid of strong beliefs, seemingly bereft of meaningful experience to pass on to their young, they have at their center a vague emptiness. These shadowy adults have removed themselves from the universal task of parenthood, guiding and shaping the young. And they've done so, listen, they've done so not because they're too busy at work or watching television, but because they have no cultural tools with which to do the job, no moral awareness or worthy aspirations that would help form a firm sense of self. This is very insightful. Listen, they have absorbed from the surrounding culture a conviction that values are only opinion. They have no gravity or truth. Close quote. That's why Joshua's concerned. The lessons of hard tasks and initiative build biblical values that have gravity and truth. They give meaningful experience. They establish moral awareness and aspirations that keep generations of people healthy. We need to learn from Joshua to build biblical values. And number two, here's the second thing that I've seen change. We get encouraged in the journey. It is fascinating that when people put themselves out there following God's instruction, they tend to be very buoyed along by other people. Charles Wesley experienced this change, and he details it in a great hymn. Listen to his hymn, "And Can It Be?" Charles Wesley wrote this. Speaking of Jesus, he said, "He left his Father's throne above, so free, so infinite his grace, emptied himself of all but love, and bled for Adam's helpless race. 'Tis mercy all, immense and free, for, oh my God, it found out me. Amazing love, how can it be that thou, my God, shouldst die for me? Long my imprisoned spirit lay fast bound in sin and nature's night. Thine eye diffused a quickening ray. I woke. The dungeon flamed with light. My chains fell off. My heart was free. I rose, went forth, and followed thee. No condemnation now I dread. Jesus and all in him is mine. Alive in me, my living head, and clothed in righteousness divine. Bold I approach the eternal throne and claim the crown through Christ my own." What we just read is one of the greatest statements of Christian theology. Wesley is saying what Joshua is saying. Because of what God has done, we can do what God wants done. Because of God's encouragement to us in Christ, we can rise. We can boldly live.